In the middle sections of Part 5 of Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche continues his natural history of morals and introduces several aspects of what he will later call slave morality. In section 189, he notes that the industrious races of the earth, thinking especially here of the English, find leisure hard to bear. Being idle, taking leisure, is a burden for them. And he notes that it's the special genius of the English to have made the Sabbath so boring that the Englishman looks forward to its ending so he can get back to work, so he can resume doing something useful. Nietzsche also observes here that constraint and the religious discipline of fasting can help to purify and sharpen a natural drive. And as Kaufmann observes in the footnote, Nietzsche is the first to use the word sublimate in the sense that Freud would later make famous. The next two sections deal with Plato and Socrates, and as we know from other works, Nietzsche's judgment of Socrates is somewhat complicated. In section 190, Nietzsche suggests that the noble Plato may be somewhat ashamed of his lingering Socratism. He does the best he can with it, but it is a kind of lingering or leftover legacy of something that really is beneath him intellectually and in a character sense. Nietzsche is thinking here especially of the doctrine that no one does wrong willingly. This he associates with the rabble, with a kind of herd instinct utilitarianism that assumes that bad actions are just actions that have bad consequences, and conversely, that good actions are actions that are useful and agreeable, that have beneficial results. We can recognize here some of the vocabulary of slave morality. These are the terms of evil and good that we'll see explored more fully in section 260. In section 191, Nietzsche discusses Plato versus Socrates on the question of instinct and rationality in moral valuations. Plato, being the simpler and more naive of the two, holds that reason and instinct generally converge on the good and on God, and Nietzsche says that all Christian theologians have followed Plato down this path, and thus the herd, Nietzsche's term, the herd has triumphed. Socrates, he says, is more subtle in his evaluation of instinct in its role in morality. Socrates initially sided with reason, but then came to recognize the instinctive element in moral judgments. And he concluded that one should follow the instincts but persuade reason to assist them with good reasons. And I wonder if this might be a possible model for Nietzsche's philosophy, in the sense that Platonic and Christian morals are regnant, but a more subtle philosopher, Nietzsche or perhaps Socrates, sees the deeper reality beneath these things, but does this in a kind of ironic way. Section 192, Nietzsche observes that across the board we rely on our own assumptions, imagination, and simulations, rather than on a strictly empirical seeing what is there. He applies this to perception, to social psychology, and even to science. We see what we expect to see in all these fields. And Nietzsche says, one is much more of an artist than one knows. I think we might extend this insight by applying it to the idea of self-knowledge. Think of the self knowing itself as self-creating, as the author of its own self. We'd have here the idea of a self as a work of art that might be characteristic of some later existential thinkers. In section 195, Nietzsche notes that the ancient Jews worked this first inversion of values with world-changing results. They rolled together the concepts of rich, godless, violent, and sensuous into a concept of evil, and their opposites, poor, holy, harmless, and spiritual, are likewise combined into a concept which we'll see later called good. And this, he says, is the beginning of the slave rebellion in morals, this past revaluation of values that Nietzsche intends to undo later on. In section 196, Nietzsche merely observes that in astronomy we can infer the existence of dark stellar bodies by their effect on observable ones. And this is a kind of model for Nietzsche's moral analysis. He will come to the conclusion about things that we cannot observe and see on the basis of their effects on what we do see in the behavior and the moral valuations of historical peoples and of our own time. Sections 197 and 198 are marked by Nietzsche as going towards a chapter to be called Morality as Timidity. In 197 he says, it would be a mistake for us to see a man of prey, a man like Cesare Borgia, as pathological, and to look for the damage or the break that is inside of him. This, he says, is the judgment of mediocre men. And in 198, he notes that prior moralities of individual happiness make the mistake of generalizing inappropriately. They try to generalize over the whole human race. He refers here specifically to the Stoics, to Spinoza, and even to Aristotle. These are moralities that try to give us unconditional or universal rules. And Nietzsche's judgment on this is quite harsh. He calls it prudence, prudence, prudence mixed with stupidity, stupidity, stupidity. That takes us through section 198, which sets us up for the final sections of part 5, a further introduction to slave morality. We'll talk about those in the next video. Thanks for watching today. Goodbye.